Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I'm Mini Pride from Milk and Cookies Total War, and we've got patch notes for Darktide today. Tools of War update is on the way. Should be going live on Steam around 5 or 6 a.m. if you're on EDT, East Coast time US, and there is a lot to talk about here. I am joined by Grimalackt, who is a prolific modder and very high-level player who's been playing the series for like a goddamn decade. It's absolutely insane. He was responsible for a lot of modding in the V1 scene, and he did Mythical Vanguard and some of the other content in
That Wish Onslaught, most notably in Vermintide 2, yes.
Yeah, and so he is very knowledgeable about the back-end systems in this game, and he is going to be our little data miner and explainer of what the hell is going on with some of these patch notes as we go through. But I would say this is a pretty big moment for Darktide. It kind of feels like we've maybe turned the corner a little bit. Up to this point, it's kind of just been housekeeping issues, trying to get back to maybe where Darktide should have been on day one. Yeah, it's taken 3-4+ months to get there, but it looks like we might be turning a corner with this patch because there's a decent amount of content here. There are no new maps, unfortunately. That is one thing that I am very much looking forward to, and I think would breathe a lot of life back into Darktide. But there are a bunch of new weapon marks, and we'll be discussing those in a moment here. Before we jump into anything, I'm going to ask Grim what I asked him before we started this recording, and I'm just going to ask him, what do you feel about the current state of Darktide? What is the biggest issue that it's facing right now, in your opinion, and how do you want Fat Shark to address it?
Well, like I mentioned, this is not an issue for everybody, right? It's an issue for me and for a handful of the other players who've played this game for a very long time. But it's also an issue that, affects the game's longevity, is that there is currently no proper difficulty for us to bite our teeth in, because high-intensity damnation, being the current highest difficulty you can attain, is not really challenging to a group of players experienced in the game. If you bring even 2 strong players to a damnation and high intensity map, it will be cleared reliably at like a 95+% win rate. And then never mind if you bring all 4 and actually take it seriously. It takes a mess of bugs and other really weird happenings for a group of 4 competent players to lose a map, which means that it's just not difficult enough if it can't challenge them to the point where it's capable of killing them at all. And yeah, there's just a constant problem that, since we don't have the ability to mod our own difficulties into the game, like I did in Vermintide 2 and Vermintide 1, Fat Shark has to provide something, or there's just nothing for us to do once we've just cleared all those maps on high intensity a bunch of times. And for people who are just not interested in grinding forever for a 3% gear upgrade, which is not really something that should ever have been in the Tide game, but here we are today.
Yeah, I think it's an issue on multiple fronts. Obviously, this is, again, coming from the perspective of players that have played the Tide series for an extremely long time, and there will be many of you guys watching who maybe don't feel that way, and that's completely fine. But there are going to be some important patch notes coming up here that will maybe start addressing that. I don't think we're at the point even yet where Cataclysm, for example, in Vermintide 2, in my opinion, a lot of elements of Vermintide's combat was more difficult than Darktide's. You have simply more powerful abilities here, for the most part, that allow you to regen your toughness in general, I think.
Yeah, it's a lot harder to die in Darktide. It's like in Vermintide, you can make a single mistake and go down, right? And then be executed almost instantly. Because, for example, just the overheads, right? Like you take an overhead in Vermintide, the majority of the classes just instantly go down on Cataclysm.
In Darktide, yeah, if you take an overhead from a Crusher and you have full toughness, you take 0 damage.
0 damage, yeah.
Yeah, so
that's there's a lot of mechanics to prevent you from getting one-shot even. Like the toughness break grace, if your toughness gets broken by a range attack, you take 82.5% reduced damage for 1 second from all other range attacks, which prevents you from getting gunned down instantly as your toughness breaks and you're in the stun of the toughness breaking. Which, in theory is not really about mechanic to prevent you from getting instantly gunned down like that, in a way that might feel unfair when there's a lot of shooters around. But in practice, it means that since you're constantly, like a good player will constantly be killing something and regenerating like that extra like 5 toughness, and even though there is a 5-second cooldown to that mechanic on damnation, what ends up happening is it's like I'll be running around with 20 toughness, and something will shoot it and make me take like 1 damage, and then I'm gonna gain another 20 toughness and be shot again and then take another 1 damage, and it's never enough to kill me because you have 200, 300, 400 health depending on what you're playing, and taking 1 or 2 damage at a time is never going to kill someone, especially when a med station just resets you entirely. So like again, it's extremely hard because of that to fully die in Darktide, because this compared to Vermintide, it takes a lot more mistakes for someone to fully die, and because of that, when you've got competent players that don't make these kind of mistakes left, right, and center, it takes a lot for them to actually die, because the only thing that can wipe a team is like they'll never ever die to attrition, and the only thing that can wipe them is just all 4 of them being down simultaneously, which again, there's a lot of one-shot prevention with the toughness grace for range, and like the way a single hit in melee does not deal damage because of your toughness. If your toughness is at 100%, doesn't matter if it's an overhead that will deal 300, the toughness absorbs all of it.
Yeah. So I think right now, in general, Darktide does a really good job of the power fantasy, and you definitely feel like a complete badass, which is fun. I mean, it's a reason why I keep coming back to it to an extent. It's fun as hell to go in, slice through hordes, blow up everything on screen, kill feed, dominating, all that stuff is good, but there has to be a late game for players who are really involved in the series. And I think even some of the people who were maybe not that great at Vermintide have still gotten to the point where they can pretty easily clear high intensity damnation. So that's just one thing to think about on that front. But let's get into the patch notes themselves. The first thing that's showing up is a nice little quality of life change. If you have not earned a blessing at the Shrine of the Omnissiah, it will now show up with a magnifying glass over that icon. So nothing really to talk about there. Useful little change. What I really want to discuss, of course, are the new weapon marks, which are going to be the big content addition to this update. And we're going to read through all of them right here, and then we'll kind of go in one by one and talk about what they might offer each class. For the Psyker, we've got the Demos Mark IV Blaze Force Sword with a focus on single target damage and precision stab attacks. We have the Elyssi Mark V Blaze Force Sword, focus on horde management. When charged with warp energy, it cuts through groups of enemies with increased power. We've got 2 kinds of Ogryn Bully Clubs, a more basic Vanguard and Relentless moveset that can be mixed up with slaps and punches. And then we have the Mark III, which sends opponents flying with tanky uppercut swings or strikes them down with lethal strike down combos. New Power Sword variant, more variant moveset, not very detailed there. Welcome to Fat Shark patch notes. There's probably a lot of changes in here that aren't even going to show up in the patch notes themselves that we'll only discover after the patch has gone live. But yeah, then there's the Iron Helm Mark IV Thunderhammer, which is more about cleaving through light enemies before dealing that obliterating blow. We'll be very interested to see how they kind of differentiate that from the main Thunderhammer, which is getting some buffs in this patch. 2 heavy stubbers, one that's a heavier, slower firing one, and the Ackley's is a lighter one that gives you more mobility and is used at shorter ranges. And then 2 combat shotguns, which may be the part besides the Force Sword that I'm most excited about. Already, I think the shotgun is in an okay spot. I think it's pretty fun to use, at least for Veteran. For Zealot, maybe not quite as powerful, and I don't actually know if I've ever seen a Zealot running a shotgun in any of my games, but there are 2 variants here, a slug shotgun round and it's a accurate and fast firing long range combat shotgun with a boost to weak spot damage, can load a single shot slug, which a lot of people have been asking for. And then there's another one where you can load an incendiary round, essentially Dragon's Breath, that sets enemies ablaze and is more focused on a traditional shotgun. So wider spread, probably better for horde clearing. So looking through those weapons, Grim, is there anything that jumps out to you immediately that you think is going to completely change? Obviously, there's a lot of details we don't have about how these weapons will function, how good they will be, but do any of them kind of jump off the page at you and make you think, wow, that's going to really change how a character plays?
It's really hard to say whether a weapon will enter the meta or not just from those descriptions, right? Because the description is cool and all, and some of them definitely feel like they might have more potential than others, but without the numbers, right? Like
Of course.
the balance of it, it's impossible to know whether any of the specific weapons will be good or not, because the numbers can change a lot and how good of a weapon is. As far as I see right here, right, like the current meta as it stands for melee, I would say like all three classes that have access to it, you've got the Entax, which is all kinds of good with brutal momentum and pretty much wins at everything. And each of those three classes has at least one alternative that competes with it in some way, at least. Which the Zealot's got the heavy sword, the Vet's got the power sword, and the Psyker's got the force sword, which does not compete in the DPS way, but has the unlimited dodges and the access to deflector, which gives it that whole like defensive playstyle thing. And seeing that range of weapons here, the thing that's most interesting, like the quad clearing force sword definitely has potential. That's basically a power sword but for Psyker, right? It depends on how well it is tuned, obviously. But assuming those variants, right, would have the access to the same blessings as the ones we already have, right? That means that this new force sword would have access to Bloodthirsty. It would have access to Deflector. It would have access to Slaughterer, which were all three blessings that would be very interesting to see on a horde clearing variant of a force sword, I gotta say. The Bully Club has to compete with the Mach 3 Bull Knife on the Ogryn. That's like the Mach 3 Bull Knife on the Ogryn just wins as far as Ogryn weapons go, and every other Ogryn melee right now is noticeably inferior to it. The current Bully Club that we have mostly has a problem with being like rather slow. It's got diagonal swings on its light, then it's got its heavy, and not only that, it's like both slightly slow on its attack, and then they're not quite horizontal, and they just don't do nearly as much damage as the Bull Knife does. Like the Bull Knife's thing is really like the not only does is one of the few Ogryn weapons that has quick horizontal strikes, but it also has like this insane cleave damage, and that its cleave damage is nearly the same as its first target damage, which allows it to become an absolute force of destruction once you stack up Slaughterer and then an armored Flakberg on top of it. It just mulches everything in front of it. To the fact that it has the Ogryn's Reach. It's probably one of the strongest melee weapons in the game that does more damage even than the Intax or Power Sword in the right hands.
Yeah, and there's an interesting thing here. There's actually no patch notes at all that describe any changes to the Antax, to the Power Sword, I don't think, and the Flamer, which were kind of the overperformers. I personally don't have too many issues with the Power Sword as it is. I think it could probably stand to get maybe a teeny bit more nerfed. It does have downsides in terms of its mobility. It's dodge count.
I want to get I want to get something out there. Like when I speak about like meta weapons, right? It's like I'm also speaking about the fact that the game is too easy, and it's like people are gonna be bringing out the fact that you can bring like a chain axe, which is one of the probably worst weapons in the game right now, and still do final damnation. And well, yes, obviously you can. And when I speak about a meta weapon in this scenario, right? You don't bring a meta weapon in the current state of the game to win the game. You already win the game. That's already a guarantee. You bring a meta weapon not to win the game, but to disrespect the game and make it so easy
trivial.
That you're basically just watching a show, right? Like a show of gore in front of your screen that you're barely doing yourself. Like you're just like you're technically making it happen yourself, but you don't actually have to put effort into making it happen. That's what the meta weapons are, really. Like when you stack a meta weapon with all the best stats and everything, the game just becomes disrespectable, really, which is fun for some people. Really, being powerful is fun, but it does get stale after a while.
Yeah, and I think the important thing to note here is, again, that's not a flex. Grim and myself and people who are running in full squads of really competent players who have been playing this series for many years, obviously they're going to have a different experience than someone who's playing in pubs and has maybe started playing the Tide series over the last 4 or 5 months. I did not get good at Vermintide until I was like years into its life cycle. So just keep that in mind. It's a different experience, but I think
I speak from the eyes of someone who has well over 10,000 hours in Tide games, right? It's If something is exploitable, I will find a way.
You will find him. Yeah, and they're deep games, and there's a lot to it, but it's definitely one of those things where you just get better over time. And I think anyone who's put a ton of time into Darktide at this point is probably feeling a pretty similar way, especially if you've been playing Vermintide for a while. But feel free to share your thoughts on that in the comment section below if you don't feel that way as well.
As I mentioned the Force Sword and the Bully Clubs. So you got the Power Sword, which not much comment on what a more varied moveset is, really. Like the current Power Sword we have already is the majority of horizontal strikes, with the only exception being the push attack. The push attack on the current Power Sword is relatively bad. And like, you know, you have to actually aim at your current target, which whenever you're pushing, because you've already slightly lost the opportunity and you want to recover it. And I think that downward strike that's aimed at a specific target is not really the play a lot of the time. Not for what the Power Sword is. So to see if the new Power Sword will have a better push attack or while still maintaining good other attacks, it's completely unknown, honestly, how it will compare to the current Power Sword. But like I said, since it's the same weapon family, it probably will share blessings with the current Power Sword, which means, you know, it'll have Power Cycler, it'll have I think it has Slaughter, right, Power Sword, and also Sunder, the Branding Blessing. Are the main three that you'd use on the current Power Sword, I think.
Yeah, I think some people run Slaughter and Rampage together and skip the Power Cycler if they don't have it, or I think some people even still prefer that just because of the power increase every time you're...
Yeah, there's also this slight exploit where, like, if you block cancel the charge attack before it fully finishes its animation, it doesn't count as a strike, so you can just keep doing power attacks that way without Power Cycler, like more than 2, until just the timer runs out, right, which would lessen the need for Power Cycler in a way. But yeah, that's a bit of an exploit, and I don't know if it'll end up fixed at some point. So you got the new Thunder Hammer, which there's a lot of details in how cleaving multiple enemies before dealing the obliterating blow. I think there's a lot of details of what exactly that could mean. So, because if it just does regular cleaving until it hits the end of its mass, right, and then deals the same kind of damage as the current Thunder Hammer, that's a rather minor detail, honestly. If it has like the exact same attack pattern for everything else, it's I feel like one's gonna be picked over the other, and then the other is gonna be forgotten. And it's like, why did you not just
balance the one that exists?
Yeah, but make one work properly instead of... I mean, I guess it's a choice, right? Like, some people might not, like, when they charge it, they might not want to just obliterate a Poxwalker. Like, if it works that way, right? Like, the implication here is that you won't be able to do a power hit on something that isn't enough mass to stop the swing you're using, right? Which, if you're using a light swing, the light swing basically stops on everything except maybe a Groaner. And so you'll all be able to do a power light swing, but a power heavy swing would only stop on most elites or just very large amounts of bruisers, and not even all of them, right? Like, some things like a dog probably don't have enough mass to stop a heavy swing from a Grey Thunderhammer. So it'd be interesting to see how that works out. I'm already seeing the Reddit clips of someone like powering this the hammer and then swinging at the dog, and it just cleaves through it, and then the dog just barely glances and then pounces them. Right? I'm already seeing it happen. So we've also got 2 new heavy stubbers for the Ogren, which you've got like the heavier one, slower fire, and then lighter one, which I don't know if increased mobility. We'll see what that means. This reminds me a lot of the current contrails that we have. You know, we have the 12, we have the 1A and the 4, and basically right now, if you're going to use a las gun at all, you're going to be using the 12 because it's just the better one with the current balancing. And I'm wondering if this was going to happen to these 3 heavy stubbers, right? Like, there's going to be a better one that's going to be used, and the other 2 is going to be forgotten because they're just not balanced as well.
Almost certainly.
Yeah, you got the current heavy stubber that we have right before the patch is not very good, mostly because of a damage problem. It just doesn't deal enough damage, right? you got this whole like setup. It's not super accurate. It's unwieldy, and then you just spend 8 seconds unloading into a mauler to kill it. Whenever most of the other people with better weapons can just walk up to it and delete it in 1.5 seconds. Right? It's a numbers problem, and so we'll see what happens with if any wins, it's probably going to be the heavier one. I think the heavier one will possibly actually kill things, and then hopefully the rate of fire is going to be not going to be too slow. And then if slow rate of fire usually means generally less recoil, which will make it generally more accurate. But then again, can't comment much more without seeing actual numbers. But if I were to take a guess, I think the heavier one's going to win and going to become the meta stubber if you're going to use a stubber at all.
More damage tends to be pretty good in the Tide games for sure. And then for the last two, we have the combat shotguns, which I think are some of the ones that I'm most excited for in this update. We've got an accurate and fast-firing long-range combat shotgun with a boost to weak spot damage. The basic shotgun already, when you're playing Vet, I mean, it can headshot and kill snipers and do things from really far away.
The current shotgun isn't played much, and it basically is never played on Zealot. It just doesn't. You don't really make it work on Zealot. The Vet is capable of making it work. If you got good blessings that increase its damage and good perks and everything, you reach good breakpoints, especially with Volley Fire, where you'll start 1 or 2 shotting a lot of important enemies. And yeah, it doesn't play like a Vermintide shotgun at all. Like you aim down sight with it and you kill things at range with it, really. It's a quite different shotgun than Vermintide games. And now we've got those 2 new shotgun variants, which you've got the sniper shotgun. It seems like you can load it with a single shot slug round, which I assume will be mostly accurate and will dome things at range. And then even without that, it seems to be fast firing long range. So it's like it goes even more in the direction of the current shotgun that we have. It's going to be interesting to see exactly what that does.
I mean, just the idea of shifting between like popping off on shooters, killing 5 or 6 of them, then loading a shotgun or a slug round, and then killing a sniper at like 150 meters, like that just sounds fun as hell.
Yeah, sniper shotgun. It's a pretty funny concept. And you've got the Cantrell shotgun, which sounds more like a Vermin. Yeah, it sounds more like a Vermintide shotgun for its basic functionality. And then you've got the Incendiary round, which cool factor. I like it. But then again, the only thing with the fire is that the way burn effects work in this game, all the dot effects really, bleed, burn, soul fire, whatever.
Trash when they're low.
Yeah, like the way they stack exponentially. Like if you have 1 stack of a bleed or dot or whatever dot effect, it deals effectively no damage. Like it deals 1 damage at a time, which is completely useless when enemies have hundreds of health. And then the more stacks you add, the more exponential the effect gets. Like let's say I don't know the exact numbers. Let's say 2 stacks you deal like 8 damage, and at 3 stacks you deal 16 damage, and then at 4 stacks you deal like 32 and then 64, and then it multiplies itself. And then when there's kind of a threshold where it's enough to start dealing real damage and kill the target, but anything below that is mostly useless. And it's like, if we're going to be using an incendiary round that does a burn effect, like how many stacks of burn are we talking about? And like, do I have to constantly load incendiary round back and forth to stack a burn to actually do something with that? Or is the burn effect going to actually do something with only 1 round? It's like numbers things, but the way dots work in this game are kind of weird with that.
I would certainly hope it goes to near max stacks with 1 or 2 shots.
The
idea that you have to pump multiple shots into a horde just to get the burn when they're already dying to 1 hits from power swords anyway, that's going to be trash.
Like for that effect to be good, it will have to apply enough stacks on its own in 1 application to actually do real damage. But
it does sound
it's
fun,
not impossible that it will do that. Hopefully it will.
Yeah,
it's a cool concept. Like I definitely wanted to set things on fire with a shotgun. So,
and then I guess the other one that I want to kind of focus on for a second here is that first force sword, the single target damage and precision stab attacks. As we've kind of talked about before, the Tide series in general is very much about horde gameplay and having a lot of things on screen, especially if you're playing high intensity damnation. That's the whole point. So having a single target damage weapon, which the Force Sword already kind of filled that niche anyway with its special attack. It's kind of an interesting design decision
it's also
there.
it's on the Psyker, right? Like the Psyker already doesn't really want to be in melee because you're so brittle that you can't afford to be hit repeatedly.
You get locked in that attack animation when you do the special, and you're very you just get smacked around badly.
You could just like if an elite shows up a lot of the time with the Psyker, I'm either going to be brain bursting it or I'm going to be shooting it or trauma, whatever range weapon you have, right? I don't really want to be meleeing an elite, even though I have an Antax. Like I'll usually be playing with an Antax on my Psyker, and even then, like I'm not meleeing elites unless I just have no choice, because there's just better ways to deal with it as Psyker, and also ways that are a lot safer.
A lot safer. So that's interesting. I think that will probably be not a great weapon unless they do something really special with that.
Yeah, that numbers game, right? You can make any weapon good if you just give it enough damage, right? But as a concept, it doesn't seem like it would fit most of the current Psyker playstyles we've got going.
But it does seem kind of like what they're doing with these variants anyway, that even if a weapon maybe won't be good, they're adding a new twist on it to make you possibly
it's opportunities, right? Like it might not be good in the current meta, but if something else comes up where you really need a single target weapon on the Psyker for some reason, then they'll be there, right? And you have this option to go with. And it's good that that's there, even if it doesn't become the immediate meta as the patch drops.
Yeah. All right. So those are the new weapons. I think there's some exciting stuff there. I think they'll actually breathe some nice new life into combat, especially if they do a good job balancing them and giving them their own kind of unique twist on how you approach melee and range. But there are new conditions and condition combos, and one of the big changes coming here is that you can now get multiple conditions going at once. Now, Grim and I were talking about a little bit earlier, one of the biggest issues, at least for me, is that I never get to play special events or special missions really at all. I see up horde and down horde all the time, but that's pretty much it. I played Ventilation Purge a grand total of 0 times since the game went live, and I've only played Darkness maybe a handful of times, Poxhounds a handful of times. So the big question, I think, with this part of the update is, are we going to be getting these special modifiers more often, and are we going to be able to play the ones that we want to? Because there are some really interesting ones on the page here, but it doesn't matter if we don't get to experience them. And at least for me, and I mean, hell, I do this for a living, I play the game a decent amount, I really haven't gotten to experience them much at all. So, Grim, do you want to jump in and explain the ones at least that you think kind of pop off the page and are going to really change the game?
Yeah, I mean, we've got only 2 new conditions technically, right? Like it's the big thing is the combos, right? We have combos, so most notably we'll be comboing a lot of things with high intensity or low intensity, I suppose. But as I was saying just earlier, right? Like the high intensity damnation was the peak that we had, and now we have this new condition called Shock Troop Gauntlet, which doubles specialists and makes them spawn in waves. And that is stackable with high intensity. So now we've got the new goal here, right? Like Shock Troop Gauntlet with high intensity is probably going to be the new standard difficult map setup that you can go with Damnation, obviously. And yeah, I guess as you're saying, like the big deal is you've got all these, right? So the other second condition that we have is not fully new, it's Ventilation Purge, but with snipers now. The Mad Lads went and did it. I mentioned how sometimes to a few people how there was the more snipers condition was just sitting somewhere in the game's code for a while. Now they're going to use it alongside Ventilation Purge. It's gonna be interesting, definitely. But we've got those 2 new conditions, and then we've got them combining, right? So you've got, if we go to the combinations, we've got quickly here. You've got Darkness with Hunting Ground. Cool factor, obviously it had to happen. Darkness with high and low intensity. Ventilation Purge with the snipers with high and low intensity as well.
It's gonna be so atmospheric. I cannot wait to see that.
Yeah, high intensity Ventilation Purge with snipers is definitely going to be scary in some way as well.
Bunch of lasers just poking through the fog and
bring your sniper resistance. It's gonna serve. Then you've got Hunting Ground with high and low, and then the new Shock Troop Gauntlet with high and low intensity. And yeah, so that's a whole lot of possibilities, right? But as the current mission board stands, right, you've got 3 options for Damnation. And usually what ends up happening with the current meta of mission board is that I would always end up picking, there's always only going to be one map that had books, and for some reason it always happened on Damnation that the map with books would have either low and high intensity, and I would just always pick, and that's from my perspective, someone that usually goes for, like, you know, coming from World of Warcraft background, I'll just play whatever gives me the most loot a lot of the time, so long as I'm not boring myself to death. And so that basically it ended up making me play the mission that had wood books every time, regardless of whether it had high or low intensity. And basically, like, it was an illusion of choice, right? Because you have 3 missions on Damnation, and I would always pick one of them, and there was no choice to it, really. Because if I wanted to farm Orthodox the fastest, I needed both the books and the condition. And now we've got all these new conditions, and if we stick to only 3 Damnation missions, they can't be all up at once. They can't even all be up often, honestly. And I just don't know how they're going to solve that, right? Because it's really cool to see the concept of, like, hey, Shock Troop Gauntlet with high intensity. I want to play it. Can I play it?
No.
No.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing. I really think private lobbies need to come back. I'd be fine with them even if you don't get to progress in terms of unlocking new weapons and stuff. You just get to jump in with what you have. I would really like to be able to host my own game, not only
And
because
mod
yes, obviously, like, the modding element of that is going to be huge too. It'll let us play the Death Wishes, the Onslaughts, the special things that we'll be able to do in Darktide at some point. There's already a bunch of modding going on in the behind the scenes. I want to be able to bring that to the fore, and I think private lobbies would be a big step towards that role. And I can basically play any mission I want at any time with the modifiers that I want. That would be a really, really big improvement to the game if they manage to do that.
You know, if we get access to that, we're also gonna all triple stack Ventilation Purge snipers with Shock Troop. Someone's gonna do all of them, right? Like Darkness, Hunting Ground, high intensity
and then true solo it.
Well, like, I guess Ventilation Purge and Darkness don't work together, so you make it Darkness with snipers instead, I suppose. Darkness with snipers with Hunting Ground, high intensity Shock Troop Gauntlet. It's a mouthful.
Yeah, and I mean, it sounds fun as hell. I will say I do like the fact that they're cutting down on vision for shooters during this as well, because apparently it was working in previous patches too, but just not to the extent that they wanted.
We didn't really read that patch notes yet. They are. I'm pretty sure that happened before already. Like, there was already something in the code that made it shooting enemies have a harder time targeting you whenever Darkness or Ventilation Purge was active. But they're making that more pronounced now, so that enemies will have more trouble shooting you whenever there's darkness or fog.
It just improves their behavior and makes it feel a bit more thematic when you're in those really atmospheric conditions.
Yeah, a bit more fair as well, because you're just not going to be shot out in darkness with perfect accuracy.
Yeah. I think we've said what needs to be said about the modifier side. I think there's a lot. I mean, obviously, this in general is fantastic. Just as a blueprint for moving forward, adding content to the game, the modifiers can be such an important factor, but the way they're implemented at the moment is true for a lot of the things in Darktide. Great idea, execution leaves something to be desired.
The lack of difficulty to go into was one of the biggest problems. That's something that can address that. It's just now we have to make sure to actually be able to play it. So the quelling peril overhaul, right? Like the whole Psyker, how they nerfed the non-force weapons that they don't quell, and they weren't quelling as fast. Now they're making them quell fast again.
Psyker's getting a lot of buffs in this patch, by the way. When we get down to the actual balancing section, like
they say that the force weapon quelling baseline is 12.5 now, which might be without stats that make it faster than non-force at 9.5. So non-force are faster now again, as they previously were. And yeah, they were previously about 24 seconds. So it's a lot faster. So it's basically going to return to before the patch where they nerfed that for the non-force weapons. And the force weapons are going to be buffed as well, so that they'll be faster now. It's effectively what this does, in a few words.
I think the big changes moving on to the enemy section. There are some huge ones here, and I know you've got a lot to say about it as you normally do. But let's go first. Okay, Poxhounds easier to stagger with melee weapons. They've always been a bit janky.
Well, they're saying specifically when they're designing a player, right? Like, so it's going to be easier to knock them off of a player whenever they're on someone. Like, it was possible to hit them several times with some weapons without them being knocked off. It's like, unlike assassins and Vermintide, they would be knocked off almost immediately from anything. So now it's going to be easier. Just to see how easier. It's like, is it going to be literally anything, or is it just going to be slightly easier? We'll see, but easier to take them off a player.
This highlighted section is going to have potentially very big implications on damnation and overall difficulty. So tweak drag shotgunners so they will follow players when engaged in melee to make them easier to lock into melee. As we know, a lot of them will kind of point blank you and not really want to.
There's a difference between the scab and the drag shotgunners. The scab shotgunners have a melee weapon that they will take out. The drag shotgunners do not. If they have to, they will melee you by slapping you with their shotgun, which has a bayonet, I think. But they do not have a melee weapon to take out and go full melee mode. So like they'll whack you with the shotgun melee if they have to be that much in melee with you. But then at the first opportunity, they'll just pump the shotgun again and blast you. Unlike the scab ones, which have to put their melee weapons back into holster and then take the shotgun out again if they want to go back to range.
Yeah, they're one of the bigger threats, I think, in Damnation currently, and they don't even have audio cues either, which is kind of different for something that's
they kind of do. There is a slight, you can always hear like the shotgun pumping. It's subtle, but it's there. It's definitely a lot less loud than the majority of specials, right?
Yeah, they don't announce their presence to the world when they're about to come rushing in, which I personally I don't have too many issues with how they're implemented currently, but I think these changes are. I mean, well, you go over the toughness stuff because it's really interesting.
Yeah. So we've got a shotgunner nerf, and not only a shotgunner nerf, but a stalker nerf as well. And for those who aren't completely aware, the stalkers are the two main shooters enemies. So you got three shooter enemies that are the common non-elite ones. You've got the scab shooters, which are the guys with green goggles that fire las guns, and then you've got the two stalkers. The scab stalkers are the one that fire and move at the same time. Like they'll walk towards you, and they're the ones that don't get highlighted by the veteran ult. So they've got more of a melee-ish playstyle. Well, they'll walk towards you as they fire, and if you turn a corner, they'll always push you immediately instead of seeking cover. And then you've got the drag stalkers, which are the yellow guys, and everybody knows the yellow guys. So those two stalkers are getting nerfed, on top of the shotgunners getting nerfed. So the shotgunners are getting more damage drop-off, which is fine. But they're also, both the shotgunners and the stalkers, which are called assaulters in the patch notes, are getting reduced toughness damage. As they previously were before the patch, the shotgunners had a ×3 toughness multiplier, meaning that their shots dealt 3 times more toughness damage than health damage. It was on Damnation, it's 12 damage per pellet, and they have 10 pellets per shot, so up to 120 damage. But it's at ×3 the toughness, so up to 360 toughness damage from a single shot, which means basically they always destroy your toughness, even on a veteran, if they hit you with everything. And then the assaulters, or stalkers, would have ×4 toughness multiplier. They dealt give or take about 10 damage per shot if they're not affected by damage drop-off, which meant they dealt about 40 damage toughness per shot. And now it's said that it's going to be reduced, and the thing that annoys me slightly is that we're not told by how much, which, classic Fat Shock.
Classic.
But that is, regardless of how much it is, it's still going to be a significant nerf to the most common enemies that strip toughness quickly, right? Like both the shotgunners and the stalkers are the enemies that will delete your toughness the fastest. And even though they don't deal that much health damage, I mean, the shotgunners absolutely can deal health damage, but the stalkers generally didn't deal much health damage. Like, they would strip your toughness quickly, but then because they only deal like a quarter damage to health, it didn't really matter. Like, you would have the toughness break grace, and then them dealing 25% damage to health. It didn't really matter that they broke your toughness. You would just stay at near 0 toughness and not really take much health damage. You would take like 2 or 3 health damage at a time. because they just don't deal much health damage, and you'd be regenerating some toughness to absorb the next shot every time. But now, if you nerf their toughness multiplier, all of a sudden it's gonna take a lot more shots to break toughness overall from the enemies that generally were the ones that would do it. So I think it might make the game significantly easier just with this one change.
Well, and it's not just that change too. We've got bulwarks too, and at least reading this, I'm not sure.
Technically it's a nerf because it is going to make the game easier, but bulwarks are just getting basically fixes where their blocking state is going to be removed when they're doing certain animations.
Yeah, but does that mean that in their left hand, when they've got the shield, like if you fire into the shield when they're meleeing, that you get to shoot through the shield?
If you fire directly at the shield, then you're always hitting the shield no matter what the animation is. It's just that whenever they're in a blocking state, they've got this like force field 180 degrees in front of them that no matter where you fire at them, it counts as if you hit the shield. But if you actually hit the shield, it doesn't matter if they're in blocking state or not. You're hitting the shield. It's just now they're not going to have blocking state in as many animations as they currently had before the patch, which again, something that you have to see in action to see how impactful it is, but generally it is probably going to make bulwarks a lot easier to deal with 1v1 with a lot of weapons that can't just open them up by shooting the shield, which is the majority of them.
Do you remember how much toughness damage the bulwark shield push used to do, or before this patch?
It dealt 20 damage at a ×2 toughness multiplier. Which that is the actual nerf that they did to them, which is an actual nerf. It's the shield slam on the bulwark no longer deals damage for some reason. No, it's just an actual push, which I mean, there was a reason for it to deal damage. Honestly, like, the shield is spiked, right? Like so they just slam
it doesn't matter if it's spiked or not. It's a gigantic slam and it's being thrown at you by a dude who weighs 800 pounds and can pick up tanks. So yeah, it should deal damage. I don't really get why they made that.
I mean, the thing that made the most annoying, right, is like it had like a bit of a phantom range, and it's also an unblockable attack because of being a push or something. Like I feel like they could have made it still do damage, but make it blockable, so that it just God breaks you, and if he does it to you when you're blocking, but doesn't damage you through the block, because that's one thing that happened. Because like unblockable attacks in this game will still do stamina damage as if you'd block them, if you try to block them, but they go through anyway because they're unblockables, right? So when you'd be blocking as a reflex, because that's just the main reflex of any Tide player against most things, and then he would shield slam you and then both God break you and deal damage on top of that, which was just annoying because it's such a quick attack.
There are just so many weapons in the game right now, and so many ways to deal with bulwarks that just completely melt them. That I feel like any change to them at all kind of feels. I'm fine. Obviously, animation's good, but
any sort of nerf right now feels like why? Because the game is already so easy as a whole that it's like, why are we making it even easier? But then again, if there's something that. If there's another difficulty ends up introduced later or something, then having the stuff balanced against the enemies balanced against each other might end up being a good thing in the long term. But right now it's just eke at making the game even easier than it was before is really the thing. But
well, there will apparently be more specials on Heresy and Damnation.
Yeah, so we do at least have that, a buff to the difficulty, in that it's not necessarily more specials by itself, but you can have more of the same special at once.
Yeah, on screen.
On Heresy or Damnation, and they can spawn more simultaneously, like the coordinated strikes where they'll all wait to spawn and then spawn all at the same time to ambush you together.
One more simultaneous special can make a huge difference, especially during events when there's also going to be more enemies.
It's always something that I call out whenever. Like I'll hear like a triple dog howl. Like I'll always call those out. Like it's like triple dog.
Because that can end your run pretty easily. It even happened to us. Like when there's a bunch of disablers on the map, that can end your run. Oh, interesting. I didn't realize this. The pox sound dealing down damage.
Yeah, they finally fixed the pox sound pass through.
I didn't realize that was a bug. I thought that was intentional.
Yeah, I assume it wasn't intentional, but yeah, like, now it's finally gone. Like the puck sound
I died
passed
to that
through
like 3 times.
the doom of the zealots who didn't get to heal in their passive and are stuck at 1 HP and just
You just die.
fall over from a heart attack from the dog passing too close.
I honestly kind of liked that. I thought that was fun.
It was funny, and then like, there was this one. I saw at least one Reddit clip of like a dog getting a double kill from just passing through zealots. It's like, well, yeah. Finally, it's fixed. It needed to. It's like, why are we taking 1 health damage through toughness for no reason? See, the last nerf we've got for the difficulties is they've reduced the aggro range of enemies whenever hordes happen. It's like it's been a mechanic since Vermintide as well, that whenever a horde happens, it'll aggro every single roamer in an area around the players, and that'll usually make it so that the horde has more than just the poxwalkers or the clan rats of Vermintide coming at you. They'll have also like a bunch of ambients that join the effort to gang together on you. Now they've reduced the range at which this happens, which will probably reduce scenarios where all of a sudden horde drops in with like 17 elites out of nowhere, because like in the often like areas with elevations, like that one spot in Refinery Delta, and things like that, where if horde trigger there, like it'll grow at all the levels of the area, and then everything will charge at you. So yeah, again, another nerf to the difficulty. So yeah, but it's there. And
all right, let's move on to balance changes, and this is kind of along the lines of what we were talking about earlier, where they introduced an entirely new Thunderhammer that seems to be addressing the core complaint most people in the community had, was that it just doesn't do any damage to hordes, which does feel a little bit weird. They're not necessarily changing that element of the Thunderhammer, but they are trying to do some things to, I guess, bring it up to speed. And obviously, I do hope that the 2 variations are going to be different enough and both viable enough that they at least can be fun on the battlefields of Darktide. But bumped default light attack impact. So versus Maniac versus Infected, you now get more smack around power, I guess.
And that's what impact would be. It says just impact, and I would want the Thunderhammer to have it buffed to Maniac damage, because on everything that isn't the charged attack, right, like the powered attack, the powered attack can one-shot mutant. Yeah. The non-powered attack do so terrible damage to Maniacs that it is like both laughable and sad simultaneously. It's even worse than the Intax and the Bull Knife doing that one patch where they got nerfed for no reason and then unnerfed right after. Like it does less damage than they did in that state, and I don't know why. There's no reason.
It kind of feels like a limp dick weapon in general when you don't have that special activated. And one thing I do like about the design of it right now is that it does have some player tech that allows it to get pushed a little bit further if you know what you're doing. For example, activating the special, and then when it
which they fixed
something,
in this patch.
Oh, did they? You
yes,
can't do that anymore?
They just killed that tech in that patch, so...
What?
Yeah, we're having fun with that.
Okay, dude. I thought that was intention. Why? All right, I'm mad. I'm actually mad. Because that's literally the only thing that makes that weapon fun to use, is using a special attack to hit something, and then it rebounds, and to cancel that rebound animation, you hit 1.
Yeah, further down in Weapons Blessing, fixed issue with being able to cancel Thunderhammer weapon special stun by pressing the wield button for the primary weapon.
Fat Shark, please, because then these buffs are not. They're not enough to.
See, it's the current state of the Thunderhammer, right? Like if it does this one thing where it has something over the attacks, and that it will vaporize a boss if you have it built properly, with trust, the blessing, and probably unyielding damage and whatnot. It's like it can 2-shot a boss on damnation. And that's a cool thing to be able to bring to the team and all, but the problem is that if you want to bring that, you also have to bring a weapon that's really laughably bad compared to the majority of the R options, because it's the Great Hammer, which was a okay move set on its own in Vermintide. Like the Great Hammer in Vermintide is fine. It's just that they gimped its numbers by so much just to introduce this power swing that now you're like shoehorned into using, because everything else about the weapon has been got into oblivion, just to introduce this one power swing that now deals the damage you were dealing previously with normal swings on Vermintide, right? And they just need to stop that. Like, to just make the weapon playable without needing to use the overpowered power destroyer swing, right? Like it's just the weapon needs to be usable outside of just I two-shot the demon host.
Well, and you know what weapon or what thing people don't really have issues with in Darktide right now? Bosses. So like having a bunch of extra boss damage
Yeah, and also
isn't
like,
that useful? Like I can just shoot it in the face with a bolt gun 15 times and it'll lose half its health. Like
yeah, like bosses are not nearly enough of a threat to justify bringing a terrible weapon just to two-shot them.
Lame. Okay, that makes me sad. I didn't notice it. I didn't.
Yeah. Otherwise, we've got some buffs right now to the hammer. It's like, you've got the impact damage apparently on Maniacs and Infested, which, impact doesn't really do that much, honestly. But at least if it'll stop Maniacs from comboing, I guess it's okay, at least. Then you got another damage buff against Carapace. So now it gets double damage from what it previously had against Carapace, which, cool. But, Carapace is literally only just Crushers, and, you were gonna just use the special on them anyway, probably, so it's not that big of a deal. It needs damage against everything else, not just Crushers.
Bruh, I'm mad. Okay, well, I don't want to talk about Thunderhammer anymore because I'm a sad boy. There are some other interesting changes here. Blaze Force Sword, the base one, is getting a buff. Increased heavy Force Sword damage.
Yeah, that is a noticeable buff, honestly, to the Force Sword.
Yeah. And it's already a good weapon, as you said earlier. You get
it's a good weapon in terms of mobility. Like, it's got the unlimited dodges and access to deflector and whatnot. These buffs are substantial though. Like 60 to 80, that's like a 25% buff to all the light attacks, and the Force the 20% damage buff to the heavy attacks, as it seems. Light stab from about kind of the same, like a 25% I think for the stab as well. So 25% light attack, 20% on heavies. That's pretty substantial. And then on top of other Psyker buffs that are around, it's it'll still be competing against the newer variants of itself as well. So
yeah, and I do expect the Horde Clear one to take over in general.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting. Like, we were seeing those buffs with those variants of the patch notes state specifically the variants that we already had, right? But usually a lot of variants will share damage profiles for some of their attacks that they share, and that means that if one of them gets buffed, the other is probably going to get buffed as well. So the new variants will probably have those buff values as well, which, yeah, they might be pretty good. We might definitely get a competitor to the attacks if one of the new Force Sword has those kind of damage values.
Literally just sounds like a power sword for Psyker.
Yeah, it's basically going to be a power sword for Psyker, except that, like the power sword, the problem with the power sword on that makes it not just the default weapon. Like, obviously there's the fact that you have power it all the time, but it's also got pretty bad mobility. The Force Sword's the opposite of that. It's got unlimited dodges. It's got the best mobility. So, if we got a power sword for Psyker that has the best mobility in the game, we're gonna have a pretty good weapon, I think.
Well, and there's already been tech that was discovered pretty recently. Telepots, you and a few other people have mentioned it. There's the whole Psyker submachine gun pinning fire thing, and the buffs you get when you're using Soul Blade or Ascendant Blaze on a Horde and on shooters. You can keep pinning fire stacks and apply that to everything. Yeah. So you don't even need to run the 6 charges. You can just run the 4 charges. And so when you combine that with the new, what I think is going to be a power sword with unlimited dodge count, like, Psyker is going to be really damn good on this patch. Yeah, Psyker was already better than a lot of people thought. Like,
yeah, the gun Psyker build that's around right now is the build that does the most damage. It does sacrifice a lot of the control that the Psyker otherwise has. Like, the competing build would be probably with a Trauma, I'd say, is the better other staff build that the Psyker has. And the Trauma provides a lot less damage than the auto pistol build, but provides a lot of control. If a bunch of melee elites arrive, you can just trauma them repeatedly, and you might not be killing them all of them immediately, but you're doing decent damage by means of AoEing them, and then you're throwing all of them to the ground, which controls the situation a lot. Meanwhile, your Ascendant Blaze, you either kill things, or it doesn't really control anything, because it's just a dot effect that does not stagger them beyond just the initial application.
Yeah, now another big change here coming is the Ripper guns. We pretty much knew this was coming. We actually just discovered that the current implementation of can opener and rending on the live version of the game before this patch goes public is that it actually doesn't apply rending, it applies brittleness, which is a debuff
Yes.
to a specific target.
Yeah, like you're not getting rending, you're getting brittleness on the target that you're shooting. Not just with the bayonets on all attacks before the patch, but yeah.
Can you quickly explain the difference in layman's terms for people who don't understand them?
Rending is a buff to you that gives you this armor penetration effect on everything that you would hit. Brittleness is a debuff on the target that gives anyone that hits that target that armor penetration effect. So basically, whenever you're applying Can Opener on a Crusher, then anyone that hits that Crusher is going to do the extra rending damage, basically.
So they're basically making one stab immediately get you to full stacks if you have tier 4 Can Opener. But of course, they're reverting the change, which was pretty much unintentional, which was you could just take a Ripper gun and fire directly into Carapace and melt it in seconds.
Yeah, also one thing with that, it's like with the max stacks, right? The description of Can Opener just reads on a tier 4 +4 rending on special attack, right? But that's not quite correct. It applies tier 4, it has like 4 stacks of rending up to a maximum of 8. And the lower tiers would apply still up to a maximum of 8, but they apply less at a time. So what would happen is like you'd shoot, whenever you shoot a thing, right, like the first shot doesn't actually have any rending, it just applies the debuff. And then the second shot makes use of it, and then applies 4 more. And then after that, you're at the cap, so you get to make use of all 8 of them and just keep them refreshed, but doesn't get more than 8. But yeah, that's how the rending/brittleness effect actually worked.
So what now the game plan with the Ripper guns is to walk forward, stab an Ogren twice, and then start shooting?
So now the thing is, it's gonna, as per those patch notes, it's no longer gonna apply on all shots, it's just gonna apply it on the bayonet stab. But it's gonna apply all 8 at once. It's like double, right? With a tier 4, assuming. It's probably gonna be less if you don't have tier 4. And so you're gonna get all 8 stacks of rending, so you'll need to stab it once, and you'll have the rending. And then once it's got the brittleness applied to it, you can just shoot it the same way you did before. So you don't have to you won't have to constantly, like you do, stab shoots, right? Because I think there's like it shoots a particular way with a different animation whenever you stab and then shoot right after it. But you don't necessarily need to use that. You just need to stab once to apply the brittleness, and then it doesn't matter how you shoot it. You can even melee it once the brittleness is in place, and you'll have the rending effect.
And honestly, even without Can Opener or the stabbing in general with the bayonet, like, I felt like the Ripper guns were pretty okay. Like, they seem to handle hordes well. They seem to handle special just fine. You can cancel the animation and kill things from far away, at least with the Mark 5. But yeah, I mean they're pretty good, and with all these buffs,
they're also like they're also further buffing the Ripper gun. They're significantly buffing the stab, which you'll be applying the brittleness with. So it's base damage. The base damage of the stab got doubled. It does from 80 to 100% damage to flak, 75 to 100% to infested, and 5 to 50% carapace. So now it deals, it actually deals damage to carapace without even adding the brittleness effect itself. And then the stab will be a bit more worth using, since 200 damage base means they'll actually, kill some things by itself.
It honestly may be even more fun after the patch, because now you're going to be encouraged to use the bayonet, which you didn't need to do before.
Bayonet aside, we're also getting 30% faster reload and 30% faster wield time, which will make it a very fast weapon to take out and shoot immediately. It already was fairly quick to take out a Ripper gun and fire at this one thing you needed dead now. Now 30% faster means it's going to be one of the faster weapons to take out, especially for Ogren.
And big buffs to the heavy stubbers too. Reload speed reduced by 30%.
No damage buff, which I think is what it actually needed, more so than reload speed or wield time. But yeah, it gets 30% faster reload and 30% faster wield as well, just like the Ripper gun.
I definitely want to use that heavy stubber. That one sounds like it's gonna be a blast to use.
But again, I'll take those buffs, but I don't think that's what it needed. I think the current stubber just needed more actual damage. It needs to hit like a wet noodle, considering what it is, which has been one of the complaints. Like, it hits like a wet noodle for what it's supposed to be, compared to a lot of other weapons.
So
but I digress.
For the Psychonetic and Sharpshooter, this is a really big change.
We got some
before that was only force weapons, and now it's literally all sources that Psyker can bring to bear, right? That's just going to be a flat
Yeah, some
damage increase.
massive feat buffs here. So yeah, the Psyker, that talent or feat was already buffed last major patch. Like it went from 5 to 15% damage to 10 to 25% damage. And now, not only that, but it's not just on warp damage, it's going to be on all damage. And the thing with that feat as well is that you permanently get the lowest value, being 10%, regardless of any peril. Like you don't need any peril whatsoever to get 10% extra damage, which means that just by equipping this talent or feat, you will be dealing 10% damage, extra damage with everything, just for having that button pressed, right? Which makes it a very powerful feat. And then yeah, on top of that, like when you're a high peril, it goes all the way up to 25%, so you get even more damage on all things. So it might actually it competes with the Gunpsyker build. Would be using Wreck and Ruin because it didn't really make use of warp damage whenever you're using an auto pistol. But with this, it might take over Wreck and Ruin. Like Wreck and Ruin might just not be good enough anymore again, because 10% damage to everything is insane, honestly.
What do you think of Wildfire? Replacing Kinetic Overload.
Yeah, Kinetic. Which one was Kinetic Overload again? That was
I can look it up.
It's not a good sign when you don't even know what the feat was doing before, right?
It's just the naming conventions of it. So while you have maximum warp charges, gaining a warp charge instead applies 4 stacks of Soul Blaze.
Random Soul Blaze whenever you're at maximum warp charges, it prioritizes elites, right? So that's gone. Okay, I wasn't using it, so... And yeah, Wildfire. If enemy dies when affected by Soul Blaze, it spreads the Soul Blaze to, like, it recycles the Soul Blaze onto nearby enemies, effectively, which is definitely going to combo with a Sand and Blaze, right? You Sand and Blaze an entire horde, and then all the enemies that die quick just send their stacks over to a new enemy instead to make sure they die as well. So it might make a Sand and Blaze, like if you Sand and Blaze a horde of mixed with elites, the horde is going to die, and then all the remaining stacks on the horde are going to be spread to the elites that are still alive, and then potentially kill them too, which might be pretty good.
I just don't want to drop Kinetic Flare, because especially with the Gunpsyker
yeah, that's the thing. Like the Gunpsyker build really makes use of the random Brain Burst, because whenever you unload on something with the auto pistol, you're almost guaranteed to trigger it.
Yeah, you can just.
And it also it gives you the warp charges without you having to sit there and manually Brain Burst, which takes a while.
Put 2 bullets into a Mauler and it just explodes. Like that's kind of hard to give up for sure.
Yeah, it's gonna be things to consider, because it's a pretty strong alternative for sure. But it might end up being more a talent that'll be better for another build. Like the current Gunpsyker build might still want to keep the auto Brain Burst, and then this talent going to be used on another build that's focused around Ascendant Blaze, but not as a Gunpsyker. We'll see. Maybe something will come up. And also Quicken, we skipped over. Now that was the level 30 feat that would consume your warp charges just to make the ult faster cooldown, which nobody used, because why would you consume your warp charges just to do a little stagger and no damage, no bonus, no nothing. It's but now it will passively give double warp charge generation from all sources as well as that, which is interesting. I don't know if it'll be really used much regardless, but if you just want to constantly be at max warp charges, it's like the point of being at max warp charges isn't all that much there if you're not going to use Ascendant Blaze to use those warp charges, you know? But then again, there's something interesting with that. Like if you pair that up with the other ways, like say you have the 6 warp charges, right? You have the 6 warp charges, which would give you like 82.5% cooldown reduction if you consume all of that with Quicken, or something along those lines. So it's a large amount of cooldown reduction. And then pair that with some other things to earn warp charges, like the one talent that gives you 4% to gain one at random whenever you were in a line coherency kill something. and maybe some brain bursting, and then you earn 2 every time. So like you only need 3 gains of a warp charge to be back to 6 stacks, and so it'd be some sort of build based around just the stagger of that ult and how often you could use it. Because with a massive like 80-something% cooldown reduction, you can use that ult like every like 5 or 6 seconds or something. That's often. That's very often. Now, if we move on to the 2 buffs for sharpshooter feats, you've got Exhilarating Takedown, which is the level 5 feat for gaining 15% toughness on a range headshot. Now, on top of that, it will now also give you a stacking buff for 10% toughness damage reduction. So up to 30% toughness damage reduction if you're getting consistent range headshots. It lasts 6 seconds, stacking up to 3. So assuming you're getting consistent headshots, you can an extra 30% toughness damage reduction, which I assume would be multiplicative with the 75% damage reduction you forgot in ult with that other feat. Because obviously, if it doesn't work, it would be over 100. But yeah, that's potentially a lot of extra toughness damage reduction. So the fact that the sharpshooter has 200 base and can definitely make use of any toughness damage reduction effects. So it'll be another competing toughness, like all three toughness feats that will have a place, really. I think it's a really good buff, I think. And then we've got Covering Fire, which was the feat at level 15, I believe, that would give toughness to an ally whenever you killed an enemy near them. It now also gives them a 10% damage buff for 3 seconds. Which honestly, all I think about is that that's really cute, and it's also not going to make it worth giving up the grenade regen for your entire team, or the X-ray for your entire team if you happen to be running with a bunch of psychers that don't need grenades. It's not worth taking. It's not something you can consistently trigger. It's not powerful enough of an effect. Like 10% damage buff for 3 seconds is a meme. It's like you cannot bank on the damage increase that is given by someone else. Not like that. Not when it's this random. So
also incredibly hard to test what breakpoints you would even reach.
Yeah, that's
like how do you test it and figure out how impactful it is anyway?
Yeah, damage increases usually you need to hit a breakpoint. It's like you can't bank on a breakpoint given by someone else. That's so inconsistent. Yeah. So it's pretty much useless, and not completely, but generally it's not very useful on the other 2 at all. So
I mean, I've always loved the idea of obviously balancing.
Yeah.
Certain rows is difficult, and sometimes there are ones that you simply don't want to leave home without. And I like the idea of buffing those to try to bring them up to par. But it's hard.
Cute buff. It is the weakest talent of the column, but
it needed something. But maybe
it's not going to be enough. It's not going to do anything. It's not going to be taken anyway. Yeah. So yeah, moving on. Weapon blessings. You've got Crucian Roulette, which is now actually going to do what it says, because beforehand it really did not do what the description said. It would give you, as the patch note mentioned, it would give 10%. It would give a stack for every 10% of ammo missing. So like, you would get multiple stacks for each bullet you fired with a revolver, because each bullet was like 20% of your ammo, you know. So you would end up with like 8 stacks at 4 bullets missing. And now it's going to be corrected. So the blessing is being changed, and it's overall a nerf, because the percentages you're going to get, no matter how many bullets you fired in the weapon, are going to be a lot less. Well, noticeably less than they were before. So I would say this is a noticeable nerf to Crucian Roulette, both for the revolver and the Headhunter. But at least now the descriptions are going to do what they say. You're not going to be surprised by what they do. Fire Frenzy and Death Splitter blessings now range bonus. No longer range bonus at any range, just on at close range, as they say. So I guess I nerfed those blessings. I don't think they were used often on most weapons anyway. So All or Nothing is being changed. And the patch notes don't mention this, although we have this picture at the top of the patch notes that show a All or Nothing giving 15% power now out of tier 3. The patch notes don't mention any new values for that, but I assume it will be there, and it's just factual fashion that the amount of power it gives is now buffed with All or Nothing as well. But the patch note do state that instead of giving power for being at full stamina, now it will give power for being at no stamina. So reverse of what it did before, which definitely makes the blessing more interesting, and it's a bit of a nerf to it for it affecting ranged weapons, because it was discovered that all or nothing affected your ranged weapon, even if it's a melee weapon blessing. And needing to have no stamina will make it harder to use on a ranged weapon, though not impossible. But yeah, that's an interesting. Assuming we also have the values giving more than 5% at tier 4, this might make it playable for some setups. At least if it keeps the range weapon interaction. If it doesn't, it's Head Digger is still going to be better.
Well, and I don't know how you feel about it, but I feel like we've looked at the stats after games, and how many times do you end up, for example, blocking in an entire run, like 2?
Well, it's not just
times?
blocking. You spend your stamina by sprinting, so and just push attacking.
Yeah.
So
it matters for sure, but it feels like it matters to me less than it did in Vermintide, where if you had your block broken, unless you were Handmaiden or one of those ones with like really fast stamina regen, you could be in pretty big trouble. Which of course can be true here as well.
I feel like it's gonna make for at least the playstyle I had with a combat axe, right? Like having the blessing give power 0 stamina is better than it giving it 100, because a lot of the time I do spend it's like near 0 stamina just because I'm push attacking and I'm dodging too much to regen much. But yeah.
So it sounds useful to me. For sure.
It definitely makes the blessing more interesting than it was before, I think. So Bloodthirsty is now lost after 5 seconds if no attacks has been made. Okay. Not much to say about that if I'm honest. Death Spitter.
Oh wait, Bloodthirsty is 100% crit?
Yeah, the Bloodthirsty is the 100% crit blessing that is available in full sword, as well as some shredding weapons, if I believe.
Do Chain Axe and Chain Sword have it?
I think so.
Okay.
So the 100% crit chance for like 8 seconds or so, even though it doesn't say on tooltip, after you kill something with a special attack.
Yeah, so that doesn't sound very impactful.
It's a unique tier 4, which is an interesting tier 4, honestly. But yeah, the special notes, I guess, doesn't change much, honestly. Okay, Death Spitter has been buffed. Now it stacks up to 5 and has a slightly longer duration, 1.5 to 1.75 on the heavy stubber, and infantry braced and recon lasgun as well. And then the Spitter on the combat shotgun is also buffed to stack 5 stacks and an even longer duration to 2.75, so it might become a good blessing on a combat shotgun now. So I don't know, it was one of those weird blessings where it gave the same amount of power as something like Head Taker, but for some reason didn't stack. Well, a lot of the other blessings stacked to 5. Now it stacks to 5 as well. So cool. But we notably have the Ripper Gun 5 would have this problem with the way it dealt critical strikes, which it would either do all crits or no crits at all, which, while technically could be exploitable if you were able to even tell that you were critting, was mostly making it crit less, and now that's been fixed. So now it'll just, as most weapons, check for crits on every shot. So you've got that. The Born in Blood blessing for Ripper Guns as well has been fixed. It previously just pretty much didn't work at all. Now, presumably work properly.
What does Born in Blood do?
It's toughness for killing enemies in close range. So I think it's like 3% on tier 4. Which kind of interesting blessing, because if you on a Ripper Gun, if you shotgun a bunch of horde enemies, you can get a decent amount of toughness, but it's still because you could be meleeing them, I suppose. But at least it works now, because it didn't before. But anyway, moving on, we've got Payback Time. Wouldn't trigger while at full toughness, which implies that you will be triggering Payback Time for being meleeed at full toughness, which means that you don't actually need to take health damage to trigger it. Still probably not going to make the feat taken over the other 2 options, but that's interesting. Bloodletting sometimes wouldn't trigger on Killing Blows, apparently. Didn't know much about that. Quietude did not trigger from Battle Meditation, also didn't really know much about that, and I suppose that's cool. Kinetic Flare could trigger on exploding barrels, that's funny. Never seen that either, that's funny. But also not very important.
But, well, actually, hold up. The fixed memory leak part, that's kind of nice. Because this game has had multiple memory leak issues since launch. and it's actually a big reason why performance has kind of been a problem for people, is that you'll just, in your third or fourth game of playing, you'll just start noticing your frames drop, and it gets to a point where it gets ugly, and for some people, like, blue screen after that. So having that change is nice.
I've experienced that. Like one of the patches where they had to immediately hotfix the next day because of memory leaks. It's like that's one of the few times where I saw my frame rate like noticeably dip during an entire mission. And any fix to any sort of memory leak is always very appreciated.
But overall, what would you say is your impression of the patch thus far in terms of bug fixes, balance changes, and content in general?
I mean, new weapons means new ways to experiment with potentially new builds entirely, since there's new weapon archetypes that some classes basically didn't have access to before. And then we've got a new difficulty, quote-unquote, to sink our teeth in with the duo modifiers.
Hopefully we'll get to play
hopefully we'll be able to play them. So, good patch, honestly. And with some nice bug fixes in there as well. And I hope we'll be able to play them, and I'm can't wait to get into those snipers and
if this is the pace we can expect moving forward, a patch like this every month and a half, I think that we will very quickly get to a point where I already have fun with Darktide. I already think it's a good game. Obviously, it has had a lot of issues since launch, but it is getting better, and to me, this patch kind of is the reason why I'm covering it, right? I haven't covered the other patch notes because I didn't find them particularly interesting. It was basically like, let's improve crafting and get it implemented to the point where it probably should have been right on day one. Now we're kind of turning that corner. We're getting additional content, we're getting good balance fixes, and we're getting actual improvements, which...
Yeah, I'm sure some people will still be the camp that this is stuff that we should have at a day one, because I think they said like this thing about like 75 weapons, I think it was, and now we're actually gonna have crossed that threshold now. Like we have the 75 weapons.
There was no melt-a-gun, there was no legit new weapons here. They are weapon marks, so some people are not gonna like that. I totally get it. Obviously, moving forward, we need to get legit new weapons that have their own role. We need to get more maps. We need to get more biomes. We need to get legit content moving forward, because Fat Shark straight up advertised this game as a live service game, and to this point it is not particularly felt that way because we just haven't really gotten much new content since launch. But like I said, it does feel like we're maybe turning a corner here, so I'm excited for that. I am excited for the future of Darktide.
And so am I.
All right, I think we're gonna call it there. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and we will see you all in the next one. Lots of Darktide footage coming very soon with those new weapons. Peace out.